This morning we have a special assembly. The Hawkins School Speaker Series tries to bring a variety of different and often abstract speakers to our school so that we can explore new ideas and hear from very special guests. But when it became apparent that we had missed an issue in our own community, we decided to change the typical format of assembly and have a community discussion in the form of a talk show. The topic today is HIV. With the new exchange program that Hawken is about to start with a school in Botswana, where HIV prevalence rate is 25%, and the fact that 2006 was the 4th consecutive increase in HIV incidence in Cleveland, this morning is all about the human immunodeficiency virus.
You know, in 1987, 20 years ago, I was a freshman or an 8th grader at a school not unlike this in New Jersey, a place called Petty, and the Petty School. And in 1987, AIDS and HIV were just about on every front page of every newspaper, probably for the entire year. That's not the case today. HIV/AIDS has really fallen to the background in a lot of the media, a lot of our lives. It's almost just sort of a piece of the wallpaper. And part of the reason for that is that it is no longer the death sentence that it once was.
And I think that, you know, we've made huge strides in terms of cutting down the mortality of HIV and AIDS, cutting down the number of new AIDS cases, because AIDS is really the end stage of HIV, and there's far fewer cases today of AIDS than there were 15 years ago. One thing that hasn't changed, though, and this goes back to what Dr. McGrath was saying about prevention, even in the US, the same number of people get infected every year. So the incidence of HIV infection, the number of new infections every year, is the same. And that's really worrisome because we're not making a big dent in the number of new infections. And if we're really going to control the epidemic or the pandemic, we have to. It's been very well shown that you can treat people and that'll help the individual person, but you're not going to make a dent in the overall.
That is a really interesting point. Today we're going to talk about, our goal is sort of to help all of us really understand a little bit more about why HIV is still as important today as it ever was. I wanted to give you a chance to respond to that kind of vague question that I put to everybody. Is sort of, why is this so important right now?
Why is HIV important today? Well, I think that we start off hearing the numbers this morning, of the number of cases around the world of people who are still infected and still sick with this disease. The vast majority of people today with HIV do not have access to the kind of medical care that we have here in Cleveland, where we have some of the best medical care in the world. It is the case that we're making a lot of progress in getting access to medications, but one of the things that we as a global society have not really been able to grasp yet is how we're going to get medications out to everyone around the world who needs them and keep them on those medications for the rest of their lives, because that's what we're talking about needing to do. It's an issue not just of money, it's an issue of a whole range of things around the quality of health care around the world.
Are there lessons that the U.S. could learn from Botswana in terms of fighting HIV?
Because I think one of the things that's important is that the culture is very different. And the big issue is prevention. And this means that educational programs have to be developed that fit Botswana's culture. And what has happened is that many of the educational programs that have been brought in from overseas, from the West, and they really don't work.
It's whether it's 17% or 25%, I think one of the things to remember is the people who are kind of between the ages of 15 and 45 that are most severely affected, and these are the people that are contributing the most to society in terms of, you know, what they do. So I think that there's even though that number, you know, even if it might not be as high as we used to think it was, it's a very important segment of society. And I think it's young people, and I'll use that to say that even in the United States, it's young people that are at the highest risk. People in cities like Cleveland are at the highest risk.
We are a generation into this epidemic, but we're not 5 generations into this epidemic. But I think it is important to remind people every once in a while that we don't hear so much talk about developing a cure. Really, we're focused very much on treating the people who are already sick and preventing new cases. And probably, you know, somewhere down the road, we need to keep that cure on the table.
I just had a question about like HIV and AIDS. Like, what are the differences between HIV and AIDS, and what happens in the transition between the two?
Dr. Yanavalli.
So HIV,
One last question right now.
What happens to a person? What happens when a person who has AIDS gives AIDS to somebody else who already has AIDS? Does that make that case of AIDS worse?
That's a hot topic in Uganda.
that's a really great question. You guys are asking spectacular questions today. So, there's certainly that risk that a person is going to get drug-resistant virus, which is a big risk that a person would take.
Okay, I think we're out of time. I wish we could do this for another hour or two. And Aaron's going to close it up for us.
I just wanted to thank everyone for coming today. Really interesting questions. Thanks for asking them. Thank you to Mr. Scott and Jacob Scott, who's not here. But if we could get a round of applause for our speakers.